Hey guys, Chris Fix here, and this is episode 2 of Project Police Interceptor. In this episode, we're going to go wire in the mic, and we'll put a siren in so we could make some noise. For those of you who haven't seen episode 1, I'll leave the link to that video in the description below. Go check that out. It'll give you an idea of what this project's all about, and it'll also show you what fixes we did to start with. Now I just want to be clear, this car is for a police officer. He is legally allowed to have a siren and lights installed in his car. This is his off-duty vehicle, which he'll be using for transport to and from work, and a lot of times when he's going to and from work, he encounters an accident or he assists other officers. And he's had some pretty close calls with other vehicles almost hitting him. And that's why in this episode we're going to be installing a siren, so his car will stand out and people will know to slow down, making his job a lot safer. Remember, never impersonate a police officer, and before installing anything like this on your vehicle, check your local laws, but all of that should be self-explanatory. So let's begin. So with our setup here, we have a mic, we have a siren that we're going to install in the front of the vehicle, and then we have our box which is going inside the vehicle. And this box allows you to control the siren. You could add lights to it, which we'll do later on. We could raise the volume. I'm keeping it low right now so we don't hurt our ears. We have different modes, and then we have all this spaghetti which we need to wire up. So the first step is, where are we going to put this control box? The officer who owns the vehicle wants to place it somewhere in the middle here. Now normally you would have a center console or something in here that this would mount to. But in this case we don't have a center console yet, so what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily mount it right here. It's within reach of all the dials and everything. We could get to the mic really easy. The wiring harness will go out behind here. And that brings me to an important point. Whenever you're wiring something, it doesn't matter if it's a radio, doesn't matter if it's lights, whatever. You always want to have a plan. You can't just go at it and hope for the best. When you're wiring, there are certain gauges of wire that you'll need based on how long the wires have to be and how many amps you're going to draw. It sounds complex, but it's really simple. Check this out. So let's say we're using 10 feet of wire and our siren's going to draw 10 amps. That means we need 14 gauge wire. So that's why it's important to have a strategy when you're doing all this wiring. In this case, we're wiring up a siren, so it's important to know where we're putting this control box, so when we wire everything, we know the distance, and then that'll give us an idea of what gauge wiring we need to use. So this siren's going to have a 7.5 amp draw and a 10 amp fuse. So we're going to say 10 amp maximum draw, because anything larger than that, the fuse is going to blow. That means when we look at this chart, we're going to be working in the 10 amp column here. Now let's figure out how long our wires are going to be. The longest wires we're going to be running are going to be going all the way to the battery over there. So in order to make it to the battery, we're going to run from here along the side all the way there. That's about 10 to 15 feet. So at 10 amps and 10 feet, we have to use 14 gauge wiring. Now that we know the length and gauge wire we're going to be running, let's take a look at the wiring harness. So we have our spaghetti wiring harness here with all the different color wires, and that means absolutely nothing without our wiring diagram. The wiring harness connects to the back of our control box via this connector. Very simple. But then we have all these colors here that we need to know where it wires to. And then we have our speaker, which is pretty simple. It's 2 wires, and then we need to mount this somewhere. And just to be clear, as usual, I drew out a diagram. You can see, here's our radio box, which is that, and our black ground goes to the chassis ground, so anywhere there is a clean bare metal spot on the chassis, we could connect right to that. Our red wire goes to the battery for power. Our yellow wires aren't getting used right now, but they're for the lights. And then our green wires go right to the speaker, or the siren, whatever you want to call it. So that's our setup. So now that we got our spaghetti figured out, let's go see where we're going to mount our siren. Our siren is really heavy, so it has to be in a sturdy place. The other thing is the siren is directional, so the sound waves come out this way. So we want to mount this somewhere facing forward. We also want to mount it somewhere where the sound waves could penetrate through, so somewhere in the grill would be perfect. So to get behind the grill, you already saw in the previous episode, just pull that right out. And right behind the grill are a bunch of sturdy mounting points. So let's fit this up, and it looks like the perfect spot right here. So I took the bracket off the siren speaker so it's easier to work with. I'm going to place this where I want to mount it, and then I'm going to mark the holes with a marker so we know where to drill. Good. I marked all the slots from the mount just in case we want to use all 3, but we're only going to use the outside too. So let's get drilling. Now we'll test fit the bracket to make sure it fits correctly. This fits great, so let's mount up the siren. So we want to make sure our speaker is facing forward and out of the vehicle. Good, now this is nice and secure. You can see this does not move at all. I'm really pulling hard on this, and it's nice and sturdy. And this is the view from the front. I think we picked the perfect place to mount it. Now let's go run the wires. From inside the car, we need to take this wiring harness and run the wires from our control box through the firewall to get to the engine bay. So all these wires need to find a spot through the firewall. So let's go look at the driver's side footwell. And what we're trying to do is find any passages through the engine bay, like this shifter cable right there, or right there with this wiring harness, or with the steering column, so we could slip our wires through. And to be honest, when I'm looking under here, I don't see anything, so we might have to drill our own hole. So I'm gonna look right underneath that wiring and see what's on the engine side of the firewall. Okay, so we're coming in from the driver's side here, and we want to look for that wiring harness. There it is. So that's the wiring harness that we just saw from the interior. And we want to make sure there's nothing underneath it so we could drill a hole. So right under the wiring harness, there's just that black sheet of insulation. So we could drill right through the firewall, and that's where we'll run our wires. So it's looking real good. We could drill right there. Nice small hole, put a grommet, make it nice and neat. It's away from the wiring harness, and that sounds like a plan. So now we need to be able to slip all these wires through a grommet. And a grommet is just a piece of rubber. And what this does is it protects the wires and closes off that hole so that there's no chafing. So you can see these wires will actually fit nice and snugly in this grommet. And if we want to add 2 more wires, there's just enough space. So if we want to add those light wires, we could always do that later on. So what we need to do is we need to drill a hole that is the inside diameter of this grommet. And then we'll snap that grommet in, and then we could run wires through the firewall without a problem. And convenient enough, the same drill that we just used to drill those holes to mount the siren fits this perfectly. It's a little bit bigger than the inside diameter, which is what we want, just slightly larger, and that'll fit perfect. But first we're going to be using a smaller bit to drill a pilot hole into the firewall. So we're going to go right below that wiring harness, right here. Drill our pilot hole, and then we'll go in. Perfect. So now the wires will pass through here without a grommet. The problem is, you can see already the edge, even though it looks pretty smooth, a little bit of vibration and movement over time like that will chafe the wires. So what you do is you get this rubber grommet, which goes right in the hole like this. There we go. Now, when the wires go in here and it moves in and out, there's no chafing because it's rubber, so it's really soft. So now we have our grommet installed. You can see the light from the outside. Now we can run the wires through there. Now we're gonna mount the radio so we can run the wires through the firewall. I was gonna put it right here and just Velcro it, but then you see all these wires. What I think I'm gonna do instead, that fits in there nicely, and we'll have this clip somewhere over here. And then these wires will be tucked away out of sight. This is only temporary, and I'm thinking we're gonna build a little center console mount right here, so we can mount it to that. But for now, we'll mount it right here. Now here's a side view, and what we could do is we could run the wires back through here. Just like so. So now you're not even going to be able to see the wires. The other thing is, there's a nice bare piece of metal right here, and our grounds could connect right to that bare piece of metal. So let's start out with this black ground wire. We'll remove the carpet piece here, and we're going to ground it right to one of these bolts. So here's the eyelet, and this already came pre-stripped, so I'm actually going to bend it over, just like that. Slide that in there. Grab the crimpers, crimp it good, and give it a nice tug to ensure it's crimped tight. Beautiful. Now we have the whole system grounded. Now I didn't trim the black wire because if we're going to move this forward a little bit, we might need some more room. So I'm just going to tuck this in here, out of the way. Beautiful, can't even see it's there. We'll put our trim piece back. And you can't even tell there are wires there. Since we aren't using the yellow wires right now, I'm going to tape them up since they came pre-stripped. This will prevent any shorts. And now we could tuck those wires out of sight as well. Now let's get the red wire and the two green wires through the grommet. Remember, the green wires go to the siren or the speaker, whatever you want to call it, and the red wire goes to the battery. Now let's take the wires and route it to the grommet. Slide it through the grommet and pull it through to the engine bay. Now if we look how we're wiring this and where we're running it, you want to keep it away from all moving parts. This is going to get zip tied up against this vacuum line up here, so it's not just dangling there. But you can see, it goes up and over everything. So it's not in the way of any of the brake or even the gas. It's out of the way of all moving parts. It's not near this, which will turn. This is your steering shaft. And it goes up and over everything and then down through there. I'm also going to zip tie it right here up against this wiring harness so this doesn't move either. Just to keep everything steady. This needs to be reliable, needs to work every time, and it needs to be safe. Now that's the end of the wiring harness that they supply you. So you're going to have to add your own wires so that you can run it from here all the way to there and then also all the way to the battery on that side. To run it there, we're going to be using this tubing so that none of the wires fray. So the wires are all going to go into this tubing, which will protect it. Since it's going to be around 10 feet of wiring, I'm going to use this red wire for this red wire and this black wire for the speaker wires. And these are 14 gauge. And that'll prevent any significant voltage drop. So it'll keep the wires cool, it'll allow the full 12 to 14 volts to run through it, and it'll just keep everything running in tip-top shape. So now I'm going to just go run the black wires to our siren. Now we have our two black wires of equal length. I'll strip the ends. Now we have all of our ends stripped so we can connect the two green to the two black wires and run them to the speaker. You get both stripped ends of the wire, push them together, and you get your crimper and crimp them down. Then you give the wires a tug and test it out. Do the same exact thing for the other wire, and then we'll use the heat gun to shrink the rubber around the crimp and make it watertight. Now that looks perfect. So our two black wires are connected. Let's get our red wire connected. So I'm just running the wire roughly in the area that I'm going to lay it down in so I know where I can cut it. We can cut this right here. We have our two red wires here. Crimp these together as well. Test it. Good. Now all three wires are crimped together nice and strong and they're heat shrink so they're waterproof. Now we're going to get this plastic hollow tubing and we're going to run the wires through the tubing and it'll just keep these wires nice and protected. So you can see there's a split right down the middle of this. All you do is feed the wires into the tube like that. There's just this little bit of red wire sticking out now, so we'll tuck that in there. So now we're going to route this where we want it. We're going to go through the hole that's right down here. So now we have our two wires coming from the siren and our two black wires coming from the box. And we're going to get these together. It doesn't matter polarity, just one on one, one on the other. That's one. That's two. Now we'll heat shrink them. Alright, that's all connected up. Sneak that in here. I'll tape up these wires with black tape just to make sure they're nice and neat. Let's finish running this underneath here. Now let's run the red wire through the hole in the frame to get to the battery. So I have this eyelet, but the plastic around it isn't heat shrink. So I'm going to take the plastic off, and I have a piece of heat shrink to fit right over it. Heat shrink prevents corrosion, holds the wire in place, and really seals in that connection from the elements, so I prefer using it. I'm going to slide the heat shrink on the wire and then attach the eyelet to the end. Crimp it down, slide the heat shrink over like that, and use a heat gun to shrink it. So we're about to connect the power wire, so make sure the siren box is shut off completely. We'll tighten this down. Close that up. And now let's go try it out. Okay, everything's all wired in place properly. Let's go turn her on. We got power. Beautiful. Okay, now that we know it works, I'm gonna just shut it off and we're gonna finish tidying up all the wiring. I'm gonna use zip ties to secure the wiring harness so it doesn't move around. So we have our wires coming up. It's secured right here. It comes across. It's kind of tucked down into there, all secured. It goes through there, comes up, and here's where I'm going to want to secure it, right up here. Then it follows the frame along the front. It goes through the frame and meets the battery. So we are almost done. We'll put the shroud back on. Now we have one more thing we need to do. We need to mount the microphone somewhere in the car. Comes with this mounting plate. I kind of like right there. So then it'll sit just like this. So we're gonna put it like right here. These will screw in, but first I need to drill a hole. Actually, I wonder if I could put it right here. So right here we have these vents, and I'm thinking if I could put this right here and just use the existing vent holes, so then I don't have to drill anything, and it could go back to stock without any holes. Good. And that's dirty. That's not coming off right there. I like that. So now we could easily grab that from the driver's seat, put it back. And the best part is there's no holes, so I didn't have to drill holes in here. So if we wanted to put this somewhere else, we could easily just take that off. Beautiful. Now we're officially done. Let's go try the siren out. So that's how you turn it on. You can adjust the volume right here. We'll put it at about half volume. And then you have different settings here. And then later on we could use these two switches for our lights. The fuse is a 10 amp fuse and it's built into this, so we don't have to worry about adding a fuse. And then anytime you want, you just press the mic and you can speak into the mic. And to shut it off, just close that like that, and you're good to go. So there we go, episode 2, Project Police Interceptor. Installing a siren so that the police officer could be heard. There's less of a chance of him getting struck by a vehicle. It'll make it known that he's on scene. And I think that's pretty cool. It worked out great. And stay tuned for episode 3. Hopefully you like how Project Police Interceptor is coming along. If you're liking it so far, give the video a thumbs up. Also, if you're not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button to get new updates on different projects, as well as this project. There are 3 videos down below you could click on, or you can find the links to those videos in the description. And also, if you have any ideas, let me know. Stuff that people have never done or don't commonly do is what's going to make Project Police Interceptor stand out.